The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Queen Consort Helena paced furiously in her private chambers. Her emerald silk gown rustled with each angry step, and her jeweled fingers clutched a letter that had arrived just minutes before. The contents of that letter would change everything in the kingdom of Valdoria. Helena had always been a woman of sharp intelligence and fierce ambition. Born into minor nobility, she had clawed her way to the throne through calculated charm and ruthless determination. Now, at 45, she had spent 3 years as queen consort to King Edmund, but she had never felt secure in her position. The shadow of the beloved late Queen Isabella still loomed large over the palace. And, more troubling still, was the growing popularity of Princess Catherine, Edmund's daughter-in-law. The letter in Helena's hands was from her network of informants throughout the kingdom. It contained disturbing news about Princess Catherine's recent activities. Catherine, married to Crown Prince Alexander, had been making unauthorized visits to the common districts of the capital city. She had been distributing food and medicine to the poor, speaking with merchants about their struggles, and, worst of all, making promises about future reforms when she became queen. Helena's dark eyes flashed with anger as she reread the most damaging passage. Catherine had allegedly told a group of struggling farmers that the old ways of the palace must change and that the people's voices deserve to be heard in the halls of power. To Helena, this wasn't just naive idealism, it was borderline treason. The queen consort had worked too hard to reach her current position to allow some young upstart to undermine the established order. Catherine's popularity with the common people was growing daily, and Helena knew that public opinion could be a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. The girl was only 28, beautiful in an understated way that made her seem approachable to the masses, and, worst of all, she was genuinely kind-hearted. These qualities made her a serious threat. Helena's personal maid, Margaret, entered the chamber quietly. She had served Helena for over a decade, and could read her mistress's moods like an open book. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Your Majesty," Margaret said softly, "Prince Alexander has returned from his hunting trip. He's requesting an audience with you." Helena's mind raced. Alexander's timing couldn't be better. She needed to plant seeds of doubt about his wife before Catherine's influence grew any stronger. The crown prince was devoted to Catherine, but he was also fiercely protective of royal protocol and tradition. If Helena could frame Catherine's actions as a threat to the monarchy itself, she might be able to turn Alexander against his own wife. "Send him in immediately," Helena commanded, quickly hiding the letter in her jewelry box. Prince Alexander entered the chamber with his characteristic confidence. At 32, he was the image of royal bearing, tall, broad-shouldered, with the piercing blue eyes that ran in his bloodline. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from travel, and he still wore his hunting clothes, suggesting he had come straight to see Helena upon his return. "Stepmother," Alexander said with a formal bow. Their relationship had always been cordial, but distant. Helena had married his father when Alexander was already 29, so she had never played a maternal role in his life. "Alexander, my dear, how was your expedition?" Helena asked, forcing warmth into her voice. "Successful, thank you. But I've heard some concerning reports about events here at the palace while I was away. Something about Catherine causing a disturbance in the city." Helena's heart leaped. Someone had already been feeding Alexander information about his wife's activities. This was perfect. She wouldn't have to be the first to bring up Catherine's behavior. "Oh, my dear boy," Helena sighed dramatically, sinking into a velvet chair. "I've been so worried about how to discuss this with you. Catherine is such a sweet girl, but I fear she may not fully understand the delicate nature of royal responsibilities." Alexander's expression grew serious. "What exactly happened?" "Well," Helena began carefully, "it seems Catherine has been making private visits to various districts in the city. She's been speaking with citizens about political matters, making promises about changes to come when she's queen." Alexander's jaw tightened. As crown prince, he understood better than most how dangerous it could be for royals to make unauthorized promises to the people. Such actions could be seen as undermining the current king's authority or, worse, as incitement. She spoke about political reforms? Alexander asked, his voice low and controlled. Helena nodded solemnly. I'm afraid so. She apparently told a group of farmers that the old ways must change and spoke about giving the common people a voice in palace affairs. Alexander, I'm sure she meant well, but you know how such words can be twisted by those who wish harm to the crown. The crown prince began pacing, much as Helena had done earlier. She watched him carefully, noting the conflict playing across his features. She knew Alexander loved his wife deeply, but she also knew he valued duty and protocol above all else. There's more, Helena continued, pressing her advantage. My sources tell me that some of the more radical elements in the city are already using Catherine's words as rallying cries. They're claiming that the future queen supports their calls for dramatic changes to the government structure. This was a careful exaggeration of the truth, but Helena needed to make Alexander understand the severity of the situation. She had spent years studying the political landscape of Eldoria, and she knew that there were indeed small groups of citizens who favored reducing royal power in favor of more democratic governance. If Catherine's words could be linked to such movements, it would be disastrous for the monarchy. I need to speak with Catherine immediately, Alexander said, his princely authority evident in his tone. Of course, Helena agreed. But, Alexander, might I suggest that this situation requires more than just a conversation? Catherine's actions, however well-intentioned, have created a genuine security risk for the royal family. The palace guard should be informed, and perhaps the royal council should convene to discuss appropriate measures. Alexander stopped pacing and looked directly at Helena. What kind of measures are you suggesting? Helena had been building to this moment. Well, in cases where royal family members engage in activities that could be construed as seditious, there are protocols, temporary restrictions on movement, supervised activities, formal review of their actions by the royal court. You're talking about house arrest, Alexander said bluntly. I'm talking about protection, Helena replied smoothly. Protection for Catherine from those who might exploit her words, protection for the monarchy from potential scandal, and protection for you, my dear, from having to choose between your wife and your duty to the crown. Alexander was silent for a long moment, weighing Helena's words. The queen consort watched him carefully, knowing that this conversation would determine whether her plan succeeded or failed. She had planted the seeds of doubt, but Alexander would have to choose to act on them. I want to see all the reports about Catherine's activities, Alexander finally said. Every detail, every witness account, every rumor. If what you're telling me is true, then, yes, we may need to take protective measures. Helena smiled inwardly while maintaining a concerned expression. Of course, I'll have everything gathered for you within the hour. Alexander, I know this is difficult, but we must put the stability of the kingdom above our personal feelings. As Alexander left to prepare for his review of the evidence, Helena felt a surge of satisfaction. The first phase of her plan was working perfectly. Catherine's genuine compassion for the common people, the very quality that made her beloved, was about to become the weapon Helena would use to destroy her. But Helena knew that convincing Alexander was only the beginning. She would need to present evidence that was damning enough to justify drastic action, and she would need to do it before Catherine returned to the palace from her latest humanitarian mission. The queen consort immediately summoned her most trusted advisor, Lord Marcus Blackwood. Marcus was a man who understood the darker necessities of political power, and Helena knew she could count on his discretion and cunning. Marcus, she said when he arrived, we need to discuss Princess Catherine's recent activities. I believe they constitute a threat to royal security, and I need your help in documenting that threat. Lord Blackwood, a thin man with calculating gray eyes, nodded slowly. What exactly are we documenting, Your Majesty? Evidence of seditious behavior, Helena replied. Evidence that will justify whatever measures Prince Alexander deems necessary to protect the crown. As the two began planning their strategy, neither noticed the small figure of a palace servant who had been cleaning in the corridor outside Helena's chambers. The servant, a young woman named Lucy who had always been kind to Princess Catherine, had heard enough of the conversation to understand that the beloved princess was in serious danger. Lucy knew she had to warn someone, but she also knew that speaking against the queen consort could cost her position or worse. As she hurried through the palace corridors with her cleaning supplies, her mind raced with the implications of what she had overheard. Meanwhile, Princess Catherine was completely unaware of the storm brewing at the palace. She was in the merchant district of the capital, sitting with a group of elderly women who had been struggling to afford medicine for their ailments. Catherine had brought not only financial assistance, but also a royal physician to examine them free of charge. "Your Highness," one of the women said with tears in her eyes, "you are truly a blessing to our people. When you are queen, perhaps life will be better for families like ours." Catherine smiled gently. "I hope that together we can make positive changes for everyone in Valdoria. Every citizen deserves to live with dignity and hope." These were the words that would soon be twisted and used against her, but in the moment, Catherine spoke them with pure sincerity. She had no idea that her stepmother-in-law was already weaving a web of accusations that would threaten everything she held dear. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Ravencrest Palace and determine the future of the Valdorian monarchy. The grand throne room of Ravencrest Palace had witnessed many dramatic moments throughout its 500-year history, but few as tense as the scene unfolding on this particular evening. King Edmund sat upon his golden throne, his weathered face grave as he studied the documents spread before him. To his right stood Prince Alexander, still in his formal military dress from the emergency council meeting that had been called an hour earlier. To his left, Queen Consort Helena maintained her composure, though her eyes gleamed with barely concealed satisfaction. Princess Catherine stood in the center of the vast room, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the ornate surroundings. She had been summoned from her chambers without explanation, and the formal atmosphere told her that something was terribly wrong. The princess's auburn hair was hastily arranged, and her green eyes reflected confusion and growing concern as she faced the royal tribunal. "Catherine," King Edmund began, his deep voice echoing in the chamber, "you stand accused of engaging in activities that may constitute sedition against the crown. These are very serious charges that could threaten not only your position as future queen, but your freedom as well." Catherine's face went pale, but she stood straighter, drawing on the inner strength that had carried her through many challenges. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. What activities are you referring to?" Queen Helena stepped forward, holding a leather portfolio filled with documents and witness statements. "Catherine, dear, over the past several weeks, you have been making unauthorized visits throughout the kingdom, speaking to common citizens about political matters, and making promises about future governmental changes. These actions have been interpreted by many as undermining the current royal authority." "I was helping people in need," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite her shock. "I brought food to hungry families, medicine to the sick, and hope to those who felt forgotten. How can acts of compassion be considered sedition?" Alexander spoke for the first time since his wife had entered the room. "Catherine, it's not the compassion that's in question. It's the political promises you made. You told citizens that the old ways must change and spoke about giving common people a voice in royal governance. These statements have been circulating throughout the capital, causing unrest and raising expectations that cannot be met." Catherine turned to face her husband, her heart breaking at the distance she saw in his blue eyes. "Alexander, those words were taken out of context. I simply meant that we should be more responsive to our people's needs. I never suggested overthrowing the government or undermining your father's rule. Intent doesn't matter when the result is the same," Helena interjected smoothly. "We have reports of radical groups using your words as propaganda for their cause. There have been unauthorized gatherings in the city where people are demanding immediate reforms based on what they believe to be your promises." King Edmund raised his hand for silence. "Catherine, I have known you since you married my son 4 years ago. I have watched you grow into your role as princess, and I have always believed you to have the best intentions for our kingdom. However, the evidence presented to me today suggests that your recent actions have created a genuine threat to the stability of our realm." The king gestured to Lord Blackwood, who stepped forward with a scroll of formal charges. "Princess Catherine of Valdoria," Lord Blackwood read in his cold, precise voice, "you are hereby accused of the following offenses against the crown. First, engaging in unauthorized political discourse with subjects of the realm. Second, making promises regarding future governmental policies without royal sanction. Third, inciting civil unrest through seditious statements. Fourth, undermining the authority of the reigning monarch through unofficial diplomatic activities." Catherine listened to each charge with growing disbelief. Everything she had done came from a place of love for the people she would one day serve as queen. The idea that her compassion could be twisted into accusations of treason was almost incomprehensible. "These charges are based on misunderstandings and deliberate misrepresentations," Catherine said, fighting to keep her voice calm. "I request the right to present my own evidence and to call witnesses who can speak to my true intentions and actions." Helena exchanged a quick glance with Lord Blackwood. They had anticipated this response and prepared accordingly. "Of course, dear," Helena said with false sympathy. "However, given the serious nature of these charges and the current unrest in the city, the Royal Council has determined that you pose a flight risk and a continued danger to public safety." "What exactly are you saying?" Catherine demanded, though she was beginning to understand the trap that had been laid for her. King Edmund stood from his throne, his royal bearing making him seem even taller and more imposing. "Catherine, by the power vested in me as sovereign of Valdoria, I hereby order your immediate detention pending a full investigation into these charges. You will be confined to the east wing of the palace under guard until this matter can be properly resolved." The words hit Catherine like physical blows. House arrest. They were placing her under house arrest based on twisted interpretations of her charitable work. She turned desperately to Alexander, hoping to see some sign that her husband would defend her. Alexander's internal struggle was evident on his face. His love for Catherine warred with his duty to the crown and his genuine concern about the political implications of her actions. "Catherine," he said quietly, "if you're innocent of these charges, then the investigation will clear your name. But until then, we must think about the stability of the kingdom. You're actually supporting this?" Catherine asked, her voice breaking for the first time. "Alexander, you know me. You know my heart. How can you believe I would ever do anything to harm Valdoria or your family?" Before Alexander could respond, Helena stepped between them. "This isn't about personal feelings, Catherine. This is about protecting the monarchy from those who would exploit your well-meaning actions for their own revolutionary purposes. Even now, there are riots being planned in your name." "Riots?" Catherine exclaimed. "That's impossible. I've never advocated for violence or illegal activity of any kind." Lord Blackwood unrolled another document. "We have intelligence reports indicating that several radical organizations are planning demonstrations for tomorrow evening. They intend to march on the palace, demanding immediate implementation of the reforms they believe you promised them." This was news to Catherine, and the shock showed on her face. Helena noted her genuine surprise with satisfaction. It would be interpreted as guilt by those who wanted to see Catherine as a threat. "You see," Helena said gently, "this is why we must take protective measures. These people are using your name and your words to justify actions that could lead to bloodshed. By confining you temporarily, we protect both you and the kingdom from the consequences of this misunderstanding." Captain Marcus Reed of the Royal Guard stepped forward at the king's gesture. He was a career soldier in his 40s, known for his unwavering loyalty to the crown and his strict adherence to protocol. "Your Highness," he addressed Catherine formally, "I must escort you to your quarters in the East Wing." Catherine looked around the throne room one final time, her gaze lingering on each face. King Edmund appeared genuinely troubled, but resolute. Helena maintained her mask of concerned authority. Lord Blackwood watched with cold calculation. And Alexander. Alexander couldn't meet her eyes. I request permission to send word to my family, Catherine said with as much dignity as she could muster. All communications will be supervised during the investigation, Helena replied. This is for the security of all involved parties. As Captain Reed approached, Catherine held up her hand. I can walk unescorted, Captain. I am not yet a common criminal. The small procession made its way through the palace corridors toward the East Wing. Word of the princess's arrest had already begun to spread among the palace staff, and Catherine could see the shock and confusion on the faces of servants and courtiers as they passed. Some bowed respectfully, others averted their eyes, and a few watched with barely concealed sympathy. The East Wing had historically been used to house visiting dignitaries, but its isolated location and easily controlled access points made it perfect for secure detention. Catherine's new quarters consisted of a sitting room, bedroom, and private bathroom, comfortable but clearly configured as a prison. Your Highness, Captain Reed said as they reached the door, I have my orders, but I want you to know that many in the guard remember your kindness to our families. We pray that this situation resolves quickly and in your favor. Catherine was touched by his words. Thank you, Captain. Please remember that whatever happens, I have never wished harm to come to this kingdom or its people. As the heavy door closed behind her, Catherine finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She was a prisoner in her own home, accused of crimes she had never imagined committing, and apparently abandoned by the husband she had loved and trusted above all others. But even in her despair, Catherine's mind was working. She reviewed every conversation she had had during her visits to the city, trying to understand how her words had been so dramatically misconstrued. She thought about the timing of Alexander's hunting trip and Helena's sudden interest in her activities. Most importantly, she realized that someone had been systematically gathering information about her charitable work and deliberately twisting it to create these charges. As night fell over Ravencrest Palace, Catherine stood by the window of her prison, looking out over the city she had tried to serve. Somewhere out there, according to the accusations against her, people were planning to riot in her name. The thought filled her with horror. The last thing she wanted was for innocent people to be hurt because of a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, in the royal family's private dining room, Helena hosted a small celebration disguised as a somber strategy meeting. Lord Blackwood raised his wine glass in a subtle toast to their successful manipulation of the day's events. The investigation should take at least 2 weeks, Helena said quietly. During that time, we can ensure that any evidence supporting Catherine's innocence is properly contextualized. What about Prince Alexander? Lord Blackwood asked. He seemed genuinely conflicted about the decision. Helena smiled coldly. Alexander is torn between love and duty, but duty will win. Every day that Catherine remains under arrest, every report of unrest in the city, every reminder of the threat she supposedly represents will push him further away from her and closer to accepting that she must be removed from the line of succession. And if she's found innocent? Lord Blackwood inquired. She won't be, Helena replied with confidence. By the time our investigation is complete, we'll have built such a comprehensive case against her that even Alexander will have to accept the truth, that Catherine is too dangerous to ever become queen. Unknown to Helena and her conspirator, their quiet conversation was being overheard by the same young servant, Lucy, who had witnessed their earlier plotting. Lucy had taken a position cleaning the adjacent room, and the thin palace walls carried their voices clearly enough for her to understand the full scope of their plan. Lucy knew she had to act, but she also knew that accusing the queen consort of conspiracy without proof would likely result in her imprisonment or worse. She needed help, and she needed to find a way to get word to someone who could stand against Helena's machinations. As the palace settled into uneasy quiet, the first day of Princess Catherine's ordeal came to an end. But the forces that had been set in motion were far from finished, and the coming days would test the loyalty, courage, and wisdom of everyone within the walls of Ravencrest Palace. 3 days had passed since Princess Catherine's arrest, and the atmosphere within Ravencrest Palace had grown increasingly tense. The East Wing, normally bustling with the activities of visiting dignitaries, now stood under constant guard as Catherine remained confined to her quarters. Outside the palace walls, the situation in the capital city was deteriorating exactly as Queen Consort Helena had predicted, though whether the unrest was organic or orchestrated remained a carefully guarded secret. Prince Alexander stood in his father's private study, staring out at the city through the tall windows. Reports had been coming in all morning about gatherings in a marketplace, and impromptu speeches being given by citizens demanding Princess Catherine's release. What disturbed Alexander most was that many of these demonstrations seemed surprisingly well organized for supposedly spontaneous protests. "The situation is escalating beyond our control," King Edmund said, reviewing the latest intelligence reports from his spymaster, Sir Geoffrey Hawthorne. "There were over 300 people gathered in the central square yesterday evening, and our informants suggest even larger crowds are expected tonight." Alexander turned from the window, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. He had barely slept since ordering his wife's detention, torn between his growing doubts about her guilt and his duty to maintain royal stability. "Father, I've been reviewing the evidence against Catherine again. Something doesn't feel right about the timing and coordination of these accusations." Before the king could respond, Queen Helena entered the study with Lord Blackwood close behind. She carried herself with the confident air of someone whose plans were proceeding perfectly, though she maintained an expression of appropriate concern for the kingdom's troubles. "Your Majesties," Helena said with a respectful courtesy, "I bring troubling news from our investigators. We have discovered that Princess Catherine's activities were even more extensive than we initially believed." Lord Blackwood stepped forward with a new folder of documents. "Our sources have uncovered evidence that the princess had been meeting with known political agitators, including a man named Thomas Hartwell, who has long advocated for reducing royal power in favor of elected governance." Alexander's expression darkened. "Thomas Hartwell? I know that name. He was involved in the grain riots 3 years ago." "Indeed," Helena said gravely. "According to our witnesses, Catherine met with Hartwell privately at least twice in the past month. During these meetings, she allegedly discussed specific plans for governmental reforms that would dramatically reduce the monarchy's authority. This was a complete fabrication, but Helena had spent considerable time and resources creating false witnesses and forged documentation to support her claims. She had learned long ago that the most effective lies were those that contained just enough truth to seem credible. King Edmund examined the new evidence with growing alarm. "If Catherine has been coordinating with known revolutionaries, then we're dealing with something far more serious than misguided charity work." "Father, wait," Alexander interrupted, his suspicion finally crystallizing into action. "I want to speak with these witnesses myself. I want to examine the original documents and interview everyone involved in gathering this intelligence." Helena felt a flutter of concern, but maintained her composure. "Of course, Alexander. However, I must point out that several of our informants have already fled the city, fearing retribution from Hartwell supporters. We may have missed our opportunity to verify some of this information." "How convenient," Alexander said, his tone sharp enough to make everyone in the room take notice. "Every time I ask for verification, the evidence becomes unavailable or the witnesses disappear." Sir Geoffrey Hawthorne, the king's spymaster, had remained silent during this exchange, but Alexander's words prompted him to speak. "Your Highness, if I may, I have some concerns about the intelligence gathering process for this investigation." Helena's eyes flashed dangerously. Sir Geoffrey was known for his integrity and his loyalty only to the crown itself, not to individual members of the royal family. If he began questioning the evidence, it could unravel everything. "What kind of concerns, Sir Geoffrey?" King Edmund asked. "Well, Your Majesty, several of the witnesses mentioned in these reports are unknown to my network of informants. In a city the size of our capital, that's highly unusual. Additionally, some of the documented meetings allegedly took place at locations where I know we maintain surveillance, yet my agents reported no such activities." Lord Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps there were gaps in surveillance coverage, or the meetings were deliberately held to avoid detection. Perhaps, Sir Geoffrey replied diplomatically. But in my experience, when evidence appears this comprehensive and this damning all at once, it bears closer scrutiny. Alexander seized on the spymaster's words. Father, I request a formal review of all evidence by Sir Geoffrey's team, independent of any previous investigation. And I want to question Princess Catherine myself, without intermediaries. Helena realized that her carefully constructed case was beginning to crumble under scrutiny. She needed to accelerate her timeline and create a crisis that would make thorough investigation impossible. Alexander, she said urgently, while we debate the finer points of evidence gathering, the situation in the city grows more dangerous by the hour. Our sources indicate that tonight's demonstration could turn violent, with protesters planning to storm the palace gates demanding Catherine's immediate release. This was partially true. Helena's own agents had been quietly encouraging the more radical elements among the protesters to consider dramatic action. She needed a crisis that would justify extreme measures and make Alexander's questions seem like dangerous delays. If there's violence tonight, Helena continued, and if it appears that the royal family is divided in its response to Catherine's treason, it could spark a full rebellion. We may have no choice but to take decisive action to preserve the monarchy itself. King Edmund stood from his desk, the weight of leadership evident in his bearing. What kind of decisive action are you suggesting, Helena? Catherine must be formally tried for treason and, if found guilty, publicly executed, Helena said with calculated gravity. It's the only way to demonstrate that the crown will not tolerate sedition, even from within its own family. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alexander felt as though he had been struck by lightning. Execution? You're talking about executing my wife based on evidence that can't be verified. I'm talking about saving the kingdom, Helena replied firmly. Alexander, your personal feelings cannot override your duty to Valdoria. If Catherine is innocent, she should welcome the opportunity to clear her name through a proper trial. Before anyone could respond, the study door burst open. Captain Reed entered quickly, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of stress. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but we have an urgent situation developing. What is it, Captain? King Edmund demanded. The crowds in the city are much larger than expected, and they're moving toward the palace. More concerning, we've just arrested a young woman who is attempting to scale the East Wing wall. She claims she has vital information about Princess Catherine's case that she must share with Prince Alexander immediately. Helena's blood ran cold. The only person she could think of who might have dangerous information was Lucy, the servant who had been present during several of her private conversations. She had to prevent the girl from speaking at all costs. Obviously another supporter of the princess, trying to create a distraction, Helena said quickly, Captain Reed, escort this woman here at once. As Captain Reed left to fetch Lucy, Helena's mind raced. She needed to discredit anything the servant might say before she said it, but she had to be careful not to seem too desperate or defensive. Alexander, she said in a motherly tone, I understand your desire to explore every possibility, but you must realize that Catherine's supporters will say anything to help her. This young woman is probably just another confused citizen who has been influenced by the princess's rhetoric. Within minutes, Captain Reed returned with Lucy, a petite woman in her early 20s with frightened but determined brown eyes. Her hands were dirty from her attempted climb, and her servant's dress was torn in several places. She looked around the grand study with obvious intimidation, but held herself as straight as possible. What is your name? Alexander asked gently, recognizing that the young woman was terrified. Lucy Pemberton, Your Highness. I work in the palace kitchens and cleaning staff. And what information do you have regarding Princess Catherine's case? Lucy glanced nervously at Queen Helena, whose face had turned to stone. Your Highness, I've overheard conversations that suggest the charges against Princess Catherine are not entirely truthful. Helena stepped forward intimidatingly. This is exactly what I warned you about, Alexander. Servants spreading rumors and gossip to create confusion and doubt. But Alexander raised his hand for silence, his attention focused entirely on Lucy. "What conversations did you overhear?" Lucy took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save Princess Catherine or cost Lucy her own life. "I heard Queen Helena and Lord Blackwood discussing how to create evidence against the princess. They talked about paying people to act as witnesses and about timing the arrest to happen while you were away hunting." The study fell into absolute silence. Helena's face had gone pale, and Lord Blackwood looked as though he might flee at any moment. King Edmund stared at Lucy with intense scrutiny, while Alexander felt the pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. "You're lying," Helena said with as much authority as she could muster. "This is clearly a desperate attempt to save a guilty woman by destroying innocent people." "I'm not lying, Your Majesty," Lucy said, gaining courage from Alexander's attentive expression. "I can tell you exactly where these conversations took place, and I can repeat word for word what was said about creating fake evidence and about making sure Princess Catherine never becomes queen." Alexander turned to face his stepmother directly. "Helena, these are very specific accusations. I think we need to investigate them thoroughly." Helena realized that her entire plan was collapsing, but she had one final desperate move to make. If she could create enough chaos and confusion, she might still be able to salvage the situation or at least escape the immediate consequences of exposure. "Fine," Helena said with sudden decisiveness. "Let's settle this matter once and for all. I propose that Catherine be brought here immediately for a formal confrontation. Let her face her accuser and her defenders together. Let the truth be revealed for all to see." What Helena didn't reveal was that she had already sent word to her remaining agents in the city to incite the crowds to violence at precisely the moment when Catherine would be moved from the East Wing. In the chaos that would follow, many things might happen, including the unfortunate death of a treasonous princess while trying to escape during a riot. Alexander, unaware of this final deadly gambit, agreed to Helena's proposal. "Very well. Captain Reed, please escort Princess Catherine here for immediate questioning." As the captain left to fetch Catherine, none of those present realized that they were walking directly into Helena's most dangerous trap yet. The queen consort had lost the battle for subtlety and manipulation, but she was prepared to win through violence and chaos if necessary. Outside the palace walls, the crowds were indeed growing larger and more agitated, though they had no idea they were being manipulated by agents provocateurs in Helena's employ. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not only Catherine's fate, but the future of the entire Valdorian monarchy. The tension in King Edmund's private study was suffocating as Princess Catherine entered under guard. 3 days of confinement had taken their toll. Her usually vibrant complexion was pale, and dark circles shadowed her green eyes, but her bearing remained regal and her resolve unbroken. She looked directly at Alexander, searching his face for any sign of the man who had once promised to love and protect her above all else. "Catherine," Alexander said, his voice strained with emotion he was fighting to contain, "you've been brought here to respond to new evidence and accusations regarding your alleged seditious activities." Catherine's gaze swept the room, taking in the assembled faces. King Edmund watched her with paternal concern mixed with royal duty. Sir Geoffrey Hawthorne observed everything with the calculating eyes of a professional spymaster. Lord Blackwood stood rigidly near the wall, his usual confidence noticeably shaken. Lucy Pemberton trembled, but held her ground near the door. And Queen Helena watched Catherine with barely concealed hatred that finally revealed her true feelings. "Before we proceed," Catherine said with quiet dignity, "I want to state for the record that every action I have taken as Princess of Aldoria has been motivated by love for this kingdom and its people. I have never knowingly done anything that would harm the crown or endanger the stability of our realm." Helena stepped forward aggressively. "Pretty words, Catherine, but we have evidence of your treasonous meetings with known revolutionaries, your promises to overthrow the established order, and your deliberate incitement of civil unrest. Then, present this evidence, Catherine replied calmly. Let me see the faces of these witnesses who claim I plotted against my husband's family. Show me documents bearing my signature authorizing seditious activities. Produce proof that isn't based on rumors and misinterpretations. Sir Geoffrey cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Highness, that's precisely the issue we're facing. Much of the evidence presented has been difficult to verify through independent sources. Helena whirled to face the spymaster. Are you suggesting that the royal intelligence apparatus is incompetent? I'm suggesting, Sir Geoffrey replied carefully, that this investigation has proceeded unusually quickly and that many standard verification procedures appear to have been bypassed. At that moment, Lucy Pemberton found her courage and spoke up. Your Majesty, Princess Catherine is innocent. The charges against her were fabricated by Queen Helena and Lord Blackwood. I heard them planning to create false evidence and false witnesses. Helena's mask finally slipped completely. You lying little servant. How dare you make such accusations against your betters? Guards, arrest this woman for perjury and treason. But before anyone could move, Alexander raised his hand. No, Lucy, tell us exactly what you heard. Lucy looked directly at Catherine, drawing strength from the princess's encouraging nod. 3 days ago, I was cleaning near Queen Helena's chambers when I heard her and Lord Blackwood discussing how to frame Princess Catherine for treason. Queen Helena said she needed to remove the princess before she became too popular with the people. Lies, Helena shouted. This is obviously a coordinated attempt to save a guilty woman. Then, explain this, Lucy continued, reaching in her apron and pulling out a small piece of parchment. This fell from Lord Blackwood's papers when he was leaving the Queen's chambers. It contains names of people to be paid as false witnesses and locations where fake meetings supposedly took place. Sir Geoffrey immediately stepped forward to examine the document. His experienced eye quickly identified several telling details. This handwriting matches samples from Lord Blackwood's official correspondence. And these names, several of them, match witnesses who have since disappeared from the city. Lord Blackwood finally spoke, his voice shaky with fear. That document is a forgery. It's impossible to verify handwriting with complete certainty. Perhaps, Sir Geoffrey said, but it does raise interesting questions. For instance, why would a kitchen servant have knowledge of specific intelligence operations unless she had genuinely overheard planning sessions? King Edmund had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. Helena, these are very serious accusations being made against you. How do you respond? Helena realized that she was cornered, but she still had one final desperate card to play. Even as they spoke, her agents in the city were inciting the crowds to storm the palace. If she could create enough chaos, she might still eliminate Catherine in the confusion and claim it was necessary to restore order. I respond by pointing out that we are wasting precious time on the fantasies of a servant girl while real danger threatens our kingdom, Helena said, moving toward the window. Listen. Indeed, the sound of shouting crowds was growing louder, and the distant glow of torches could be seen approaching the palace gates. Helena's timing was perfect. Her agents had done their work well. You see, Helena continued, while we debate theories and examine questionable documents, the people are rising in rebellion. This is exactly what Catherine's seditious words have created, and now it threatens to destroy everything we hold dear. Alexander moved to the window and saw the approaching mob with genuine alarm. Father, we need to secure the palace immediately. No, Catherine said firmly, stepping forward. Let me speak to them. Absolutely not, Helena protested. That's exactly what they want, to get their treasonous princess before the people, so she can incite them to even greater violence. But Catherine was already moving toward the door. These people are not rebels or traitors. They're citizens of Valdoria who believe an injustice has been committed. If I speak to them honestly, they'll listen. Catherine, it's too dangerous, Alexander said, his protective instincts overriding his anger and confusion. We don't know how they'll react when they see you. I know exactly how they'll react, Catherine replied with confidence. They'll see that I'm safe and, well, and they'll understand that violence is not necessary. Alexander, you've known me for 5 years. Have I ever shown you anything but love for the people of this kingdom? For the first time since this ordeal began, Alexander looked truly at his wife, not as a suspected traitor, but as the woman he had fallen in love with. He saw the same kindness, the same integrity, the same fierce compassion that had first attracted him to her. And he realized how completely he had allowed fear and doubt to cloud his judgment. Sir Geoffrey, Alexander said decisively, I want a complete review of all evidence against Princess Catherine conducted by investigators with no connection to this case. I want every witness located and questioned independently. And I want a full investigation into the allegations against Queen Helena and Lord Blackwood. Helena felt her world collapsing around her. Alexander, you're making a terrible mistake. The kingdom needs strong leadership, not sentiment and wishful thinking. The kingdom needs truth and justice, Alexander replied firmly. Then he turned to Catherine. My love, I owe you an apology that I fear I can never adequately express. I allowed duty to override trust, and I failed you when you needed me most. Catherine's eyes filled with tears for the first time since her arrest. Alexander, we all make mistakes when we're trying to protect what we love. The sound of the approaching crowd was growing louder, but it seemed less threatening now and more like people seeking answers rather than violence. Catherine moved toward the balcony that overlooked the main courtyard. Let me address them, she said. Let me show them that their princess is safe and that their concerns will be heard through proper channels, not through riots and disorder. Alexander nodded, finally, trusting his wife's judgment completely. Together, they stepped onto the balcony as the crowd gathered in the courtyard below. The sight of Princess Catherine, clearly unharmed and standing beside her husband, had an immediate calming effect on the assembled citizens. People of Valdoria, Catherine called out, her clear voice carrying across the courtyard. I thank you for your concern about my welfare, but I ask you to return to your homes peacefully. The accusations against me will be properly investigated, and truth will prevail through justice, not through violence. A voice from the crowd called out, Your Highness, we heard you were arrested for helping the poor. I was arrested because my words were misunderstood, Catherine replied honestly. But I want you to know that my commitment to serving all the people of Valdoria remains unchanged. When this matter is resolved, I will continue to work for the welfare of every citizen, but always within the proper bounds of law and royal protocol. The crowd began to disperse peacefully, their fears allayed by seeing Catherine safe and hearing her calm, rational words. Helena watched from inside the study with growing desperation as her final gambit failed. Back inside the study, Sir Geoffrey was already organizing a comprehensive investigation. Lord Blackwood, you are under arrest pending investigation into charges of conspiracy and fabricating evidence. Queen Helena, you will be confined to quarters while these allegations are examined. Helena made one last attempt to maintain control. This is preposterous. I am the queen consort. I cannot be arrested on the word of a servant. You can, and you are, King Edmund said with quiet authority. Helena, if these charges prove true, you have committed offenses against the crown that I find nearly incomprehensible. As guards led Helena and Lord Blackwood away, Catherine finally allowed herself to feel the full relief of vindication. Alexander took her in his arms, holding her close as if he might lose her again. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have trusted you. I should have seen through their manipulation. We both learned something important, Catherine replied gently. Power without wisdom is dangerous, and trust, once broken, must be rebuilt carefully. Over the following weeks, Sir Geoffrey's investigation revealed the full scope of Helena's conspiracy. The false witnesses were located and admitted they had been paid to lie. The forged documents were exposed through detailed analysis. Most damning of all, Helena's agents among the protesters confessed to their role in artificially inciting civil unrest. Helena was formally tried for treason, conspiracy, and attempting to murder a member of the royal family. The evidence was overwhelming, and she was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Tower of Avonwald, a fortress prison reserved for the most serious crimes against the crown. Lord Blackwood received a similar sentence. In the months that followed, Princess Catherine's reputation was not only restored but enhanced by the ordeal she had endured. The people of Valdoria saw her strength under false accusation and her compassion in asking for mercy for those who had wronged her. Her commitment to helping the poor and disadvantaged continued, but now with proper royal channels and transparent protocols that prevented any future misinterpretations. Alexander and Catherine's marriage, tested by the crisis, emerged stronger than ever. They had learned to communicate more openly about their fears and responsibilities, and their mutual trust was rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty. King Edmund, shaken by how close the kingdom had come to disaster through his stepwife's machinations, began preparing for his eventual abdication in favor of Alexander and Catherine. He had seen how they handled crisis with wisdom, compassion, and integrity, the qualities Valdoria would need in its future rulers. The servant Lucy Pemberton was rewarded for her courage with a permanent position as a palace administrator, overseeing programs to help ordinary citizens communicate their concerns to the royal family. Her bravery in speaking truth to power became an inspiration throughout the kingdom. And Princess Catherine, who had faced the darkest possible accusations and emerged with her integrity intact, continued her work with the people of Valdoria. But now she did so with the full support of her husband, the respect of her father-in-law, and the love of citizens who had seen her tested in the crucible of false accusation and found her worthy of their trust. The lesson of Helena's downfall was not lost on the royal court. That power pursued for its own sake, without regard for truth or justice, inevitably destroys those who wield it. But those who use their authority in service of others with honesty and compassion as their guides find that their power grows stronger through adversity and becomes a force for lasting good in the world. In the end, the chaos that Helena had sought to create in the palace became the very instrument of her own destruction, while the woman she had tried to destroy emerged as a symbol of hope and renewal for the kingdom of Valdoria.